Kristi K. Welcome to Business Life After Hours, a podcast that takes a deep dive into real-life topics at the intersection of business and life. After the workday ends, that's where we pick up. Our topic on this Business Life After Hours podcast is improving your sleep for your best life. This podcast episode is for anyone who's living a sleep-deprived life for a multitude of reasons, or who's inquisitive about the strategies and benefits of how to sleep well. Who better than my next guest today? She's one of the top sleep experts in the country, Dr. Seema Khosla. She leads the Public Awareness and Advisory Committee for the preeminent sleep organization in the United States, the American Academy of Sleep Medicine. And she's a pulmonologist and is the medical director of the North Dakota Center for Sleep, which sounds fabulous, by the way. She's a mom of 3, and she has a dog or 2, and she hosts the podcast Talking Sleep. Dr. Seema Khosla, welcome to Business Life After Hours.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So, first question, Dr. Khosla. With all you do you ever sleep?
Oh, are you kidding me? I am an excellent sleeper.
I
prioritize my sleep. I am a 9-hour girl if I can get it.
So I would expect nothing less. That's awesome. So you're not tired right now or anything, correct? On an afternoon, you're not tired after a long day?
Nope, I'm good.
So are you then, based on what you just said, able to just shut down the day and then boom, you kind of are asleep with all the day consultations that you have, telling others how to sleep? How does it work for you?
I wish I could magically do that. No, I have to be very intentional about how I turn off my mind before going to bed. And so sometimes I'll become very analytical about it if I am struggling with sleep on an occasion, and I'll sit there and I'll say, well, why can't I fall asleep? And then I'll say, oh, well, because you were just on your phone, you dummy. You need to put that away. And so, no, we're not impervious to, an occasional bad night. But no, I recognize that it is unrealistic to go from 90 miles an hour during the day to just all of a sudden be able to turn everything off and fall asleep.
Absolutely. As executives, parents, working professionals, we are all, it feels like, rarely off the clock. It's like we have these morning shifts, then we have the all-day workday shift, the evening shift with dinner, with kids, activities, whatever, dinner engagements, homework, more work at night. So therefore, when you really think about it, we really are never officially done with work until maybe 10 o'clock or 11 o'clock at night. It's hard to shut off those gazillion obsessive thoughts that we might have, or that I call it like the pinball machine of thoughts in our minds. It's like
no, you're exactly right. I mean, it's not necessarily easy to do, but it's something that I think we need to be better about prioritizing and recognize that, normal sleep onset is about 15 to 30 minutes. And so if you're not immediately asleep the minute your head hits the pillow, that's okay. If you are up for a long amount of time, that may be problematic.
So I want to ask you this. What exactly is sleep? Is it that we're actually in a coma for a certain amount of hours? Or how do you define it?
They do define it as a reversible coma, which I think is a terrible definition because it's very scary, isn't it?
Right? Yes.
And so it's funny, sleep is a really young field. The giants of sleep medicine, a lot of them are still alive. I met Dr. Dement a few years ago, and he was one of the pioneers of sleep medicine who unfortunately has since passed. But there is so much about sleep that we don't know. A lot of what we do know, we figure out by looking at what happens when we don't sleep.
And, it's such an inquisitive topic and conversation because we all need it. We all maybe do or don't get it. But even things like dreaming, I always think about that. Is it true if you're a good dreamer, you're likely sleeping well? Because sometimes you'll hear people say wow, I had this great dream last night. And I'm thinking, I don't really remember the last time I even had a solid sleep and I had a dream. So if you're not a dreamer, what does that mean?
You probably are dreaming. You're just probably not remembering it. And so our ability to remember our dreams in large part depends on when we wake up. I mean, if you wake up in the middle of the dream, you're probably going to remember a part of it, right? And so, there's a lot to it. Now, what we do hear is people who have never dreamt, or at least for many, many years, and then they're diagnosed with a sleep disorder like obstructive sleep apnea, and they get placed on treatment, and all of a sudden they're dreaming again. And so, when we look at a situation like that, then for us, we think that's a very positive indicator of treatment.
So why we can and can't remember dreams does sort of indicate whether or not we're sleeping for long periods or quality sleep. Is that kind of what you're saying?
Kind of, sort of. We used to think that you only would dream during REM sleep. So REM is where we have these wonderful watching a movie kind of dreams. Okay, they're very detailed, but we've learned that you can dream in stage 3 sleep as well, and some people even dream in stage 2, and so the quality of the dream changes. So sometimes if it's a really sort of loosey-goosey kind of dream, that may be a stage 3 dream rather than a REM dream. What we see with people who have obstructive sleep apnea is sometimes during that dream sleep, that REM sleep, they have more apnea, and so then their brain wakes up and their sleep is really, really fragmented. And so, yeah, they don't get a lot of that great sleep.
So how many stages are there? You mentioned stage 2, stage 3, and REM. How many stages are there of sleep?
Well, we try to make it nice and easy. So we split it up into REM sleep and non-REM sleep. And within non-REM sleep, there are 3 stages. So an N1, N2, N3, and then REM sleep.
Got you. So if I am awakened during REM, I'm going to remember my vivid dream. Is that a true statement?
Maybe.
Okay.
Maybe. I would love to say that this is broadly applicable. It really isn't.
Okay. Right. Like anything else, right? It's independent, individual.
It is. I mean, just like, we've all seen our dogs do that, right? Where they're sort of, you can see their eyeballs move and they're twitching and you can tell that they're running, right? And so we see this in our children. Our kids get lots of this lovely slow wave sleep, the stage 3 sleep. That lovely stage 3 sleep is where we download our short-term memory into our long-term memory. And now there's data showing us that REM sleep is important for us to organize those memories so that we can retrieve them.
Oh, wow, this is fascinating. So why do some people talk in their sleep, and at what stage are they talking in their sleep?
We see a lot of it in children. Some of it is in stage 3 sleep. Some of it is when they're dreaming and you're trying to communicate with them. Most of the time it's harmless. Sometimes, though, you will see people that will actually act out their dreams. And I don't mean, just a little bit of moving an arm here and there. Some people will actually leap out of bed and they are trying to battle the intruder.
No.
We've had people fly out of windows and become seriously injured. And this is from a disorder called REM sleep behavior disorder. So do you remember when we're talking about that REM sleep, that watching a movie kind of sleep?
Yes.
So during that sleep, our muscles are paralyzed so that we don't act out our dreams.
Is that the most comatose state then?
It's not. It is remarkably active. It's really kind of funny. We see a lot of, we would love to think that it's really super deep sleep, and it's not necessarily. It's much more metabolically active than we ever thought. And so sometimes when we lose that muscle paralysis, people do act out their dreams.
Interesting.
And it can be, as you might imagine, it can be kind of scary to sleep next to. And so it's really important to identify, though, because it is associated with sleep apnea, but it is also associated with Parkinson's and Lewy body dementia.
Talking in your sleep is, and acting that out?
Not talking, acting in your sleep, yes. Acting out your dreams, especially if there are those really protective, I'm trying to battle the intruder or protect my home. Talking in your sleep is pretty benign. I think we all do that for, one time or another. But it's that acting out of dreams that really make our, as sleep physicians, that make our antenna go up.
Yes, it does, for sure. So you mentioned earlier about being on your phone at bedtime. And I think for all of our listeners, bedtime routines could absolutely be improved. I mean, we have good habits, and then we're going to need to kill off some bad habits, I think, if we're going to ever get a good night of sleep. I mean, I'm feeling like you mentioned devices, eating unhealthy food at night. I'm thinking about binge watching a good Netflix series before bedtime. Yeah. Are those the kinds of things that we really need to just say, okay, just stop those habits right now if we really want to get a good night of sleep, and just have sort of that candid conversation with ourselves that says, look, if you really want to improve this, you got to stop some of these bad habits?
Well, and I think the challenge is that we want to make sure that all of this fits within what we normally do in life, right? Like we don't want to rob your joy either. So, we embrace this idea of in medicine, perfection is the enemy of good. So yeah, instead of binge watching 6 episodes of Netflix right before bed, maybe let's trim it down to 4 episodes and then have a half hour, in the bedroom without a device, either meditating or thinking or just winding down.
So 30 minutes is kind of that magic number before we head to bed, turn off the lights, all of that. 30 minutes is sort of that mellow kind of chill time to start to wind down and really get that bedtime routine going.
So 30 is the bare minimum, I would say. 30 to 60 is what I know.
Goodness.
But here's the thing. If you tell somebody 60 minutes, I think immediately there's this pushback of, I don't want to do that. And so then they may not embrace any of it.
So then they trim it to 30, and if you tell them 30, they trim it to 15. And so, yeah, I see what you're saying there. Yes,
Or at least if we give them a range, if I say 60 and you think that's an absolute, you're like, well, I'm not going to do any of it.
Oh, that's true. Yes.
Up until bed, right?
Ooh, good psychology.
We say, and I think it's how would I want to be treated, right? Like what makes sense to me? I've got 3 kids and 2 dogs and work and this and that, and when do I fit my workout time while also allowing time to wind down? All of these things. There has to be room for all of it. And so I think as a society, we're so used to just taking that time out of our sleep time. And I think we need to rework that. We need to take that time maybe out of our Netflix time rather than our sleep time.
And part of it for me, when you're saying this, is like, I've got to become a little more regimented and a little bit more structured. And I think it's sort of like that time block conversation we need to have where you block out that time in the evening and say, okay, I'm not going to get away from that. I'm going to stick with this plan. I am going to allow myself the best opportunity to sleep. And I'm going to say, if I normally go to bed at 11, at 10 o'clock, I need to just shut things down.
So what I love about our technology now is I can lock myself out of apps at different times during the day. And so then you kind of create this whole routine where maybe at, after dinner or maybe at like 9 o'clock at night, you dim all the lights in the house, right? You kind of wind down in a very intentional way. You're not sitting there under the fluorescents.
Right, exactly.
With your phone and your computer right before bed, right? And so it is just sort of that evening wind down. And, you know what? Let's maybe not watch the scary thing on Netflix. Let's maybe watch something that's a little bit more lighthearted, right? And let's turn off Twitter.
Yes,
put
right.
that away, right? And really kind of being thoughtful about our caffeine consumption. I think it's so easy to get caffeine in anything now. There's caffeinated gum and caffeinated water.
You're kind of hitting a nerve now. Okay, Dr. Khosla.
Are you caffeine?
No, I'm caffeine, but actually, technically, I stop it before noon because I am highly affected by caffeine. But I do want to go to this phrase that you used, and I'm going to call it my intentional wind down period. I like that a lot because, we're told by doctors like you, 7 to 9 hours is sort of the creme de la creme of a healthy night of sleep. And I know some people, saying this for a friend, might be saying that I haven't gotten an 8-hour night of sleep in decades, or I haven't felt rested since the 80s. So how long can one go on living a sleep-deprived life?
So this is what I think is fascinating. We are all really good at recognizing sleep deprivation when it's acute, right? You've been up late studying for an exam, you had a late night, you're up with a baby, and we're really, really tired, right? That we've had maybe 4 hours of sleep. We get that. And we get that we're going to be tired the next day, and we get that we need to catch up. Where we are not good is recognizing chronic sleep deprivation. So the people that sleep 6 hours and they feel okay, right? And because you feel the same almost every day, you don't recognize that you potentially could feel better.
Right. Yep.
And then we accept it, right? And then we don't see it as a problem.
So what happens, Dr. Khosla, if you yourself, in the middle of a work day, all of a sudden you're like really tired and you can't stay awake and you need a cat nap? Like, work needs you, family needs you, community volunteer needs you, everyone's needing you. And what do? Do you sneak a cup of coffee in, or a little cat nap, or what do you do?
Yeah, or the caffeine nap is kind of this cool thing where you have your caffeine and then you take a 15 or 20-minute nap and then you awaken refreshed, because then the caffeine hits your system right when you awaken. But what I tried to do probably a decade ago. So in our world, in sleep medicine, a lot of our staff stay up all night in order to perform sleep studies on our patients. And so I always joke about how we're kind of hypocritical that during the day we talk, a really good game about getting enough sleep, but then half of our staff is up all night, right?
The backstory.
So we have to recognize, though, that is the nature of shift work.
Yep, sure.
We are asking people to be shift workers, right? And yes, there's some data suggesting that people who, maybe have that preference for being up late anyway, they tend to choose a night shift anyway. Mm-hmm. But I tried to get nap pods in the office.
I love that.
Isn't that cool?
Yes.
We've got to do this. And in our building, we had a 4-bed sleep lab. So I was like, why don't we just open up the beds and let people sleep?
Perfect.
That's such a great idea. I know. Yeah, it didn't go over very well.
Well, it's sort of like a little siesta situation, right?
Well, that's it, right?
Yeah.
I thought, well, this is great. And so at least, but here's the thing, even though they made fun of me for my suggestion, and this was a decade ago probably, they didn't shut it down. They said, well, that's an interesting thing, and maybe we need to be, offer better sleep education and, so on and so forth. And so they didn't completely shut me down. Mm-hmm. They laughed at me, but they did hear me.
There was laughter, but okay. But no, hey, you know what? They're going to come around to that. You're going to have sleep pods in a year or two, I feel like. It's still going to happen. So listen, we talk about that. Is it bad to doze in terms of, like, if you took a midday nap, does that screw up all of our sleep patterns going to bed at the same time every night? And should we readjust our bedtime then? Or I'm going to ask it this way, is sleep cumulative? So as long as we get that, let's say 8 hours within a 24-hour period, we're good.
You're kind of getting into this biphasic sleep where we're maybe not sleeping all at night. So let's back up a little bit. So that need to nap in the afternoon suggests that either there's something wrong with the quality of sleep that you had the night before, where it's not restorative, or the quantity, that you just haven't had enough sleep. And so let's say you are a routine 5-6 hour sleeper, but then you also get a nap in the afternoon of maybe an hour. So then that brings you up to about 7, right, in a 24-hour period.
Yeah.
And so then we have to peel it back. So if you sleep at 1 o'clock in the afternoon until, let's say, 2, do you struggle falling asleep at night? If you do, then yeah, we have to get rid of that nap. If you don't, maybe it's not the end of the world.
Okay.
Because at least you're getting more sleep.
So right? It is kind of cumulative in a way, then, is what you're saying.
Sort of.
But you have to read. You have to read the cues.
Well, and so I think it's this idea of, if we look back and we say, well, in a 24-hour period, we really want to get between 7 and 9 hours of sleep. Are you able to do that all in one sleep period? So before we had electricity, we would wake up when the sun came up and we would go to bed when the sun went down. And what we would do is we would sleep for 4 hours, and then we would wake up and we would tend to the fire and we would visit our neighbors. And then we would go back for what was called our second sleep.
Oh.
So physiologically, we are programmed to have these 2 separate sleep periods, but now with electricity, we've squashed it all into one sleep period at night.
We really screwed up our own sleep patterns, didn't we? So let me ask you this, sort of along the same topic then. How do you feel about the whole daylight saving time situation? Like, should we spring ahead? Should we fall back? Or just leave it alone?
So I love that they actually talked about this, because for years, I think we've all just said, oh, we hate the switch. We hate changing our clocks. And I don't care if my phone automatically changes. Like, we all hate it, right? And so the debate, though, is not, should we get rid of the switch? I think most people agree with that. The debate is, do we stay on permanent daylight or permanent standard time? And so what they have proposed more recently is to stay with permanent daylight time. And the challenge with this is that it makes a lot of sense in March
Right,
This down this
exactly.
route,
Yes.
right? But if we march that out to November, December, for a lot of the country, we will not see sunrise until 9 o'clock in the morning. And
Hmm.
so that's really challenging. If we look at all of this really good work that's been done on delayed school start times, where the consensus is that middle school and high school should not start before 8:30 in the morning, okay?
Hmm.
All of a sudden, and this has been, we've had lots of great data supporting this. In one fell swoop, we could eliminate all of that work. Because the whole idea is that we want our children, we want their school day to be in alignment with their circadian rhythm. So we
Hmm.
know that in adolescence, right, they like to sleep in and they stay up a little bit later, right?
Yes.
And that's
Yes.
normal.
Hmm.
It drives my husband crazy. My middle son is 14, and it drives my husband crazy that he likes to stay up late and he likes to sleep in. And so we have this conversation a lot that it's just normal physiology, right? And so when we ask our kids to wake up early in the morning, they essentially miss their longest stretch of REM sleep.
I was going to say, I feel like I must still be a high school student then, because that is, you and I have had previous conversations about this. I am a night owl. Like, that is
Hmm.
just when I like to go to sleep. And I really appreciate, and shout out, by the way, to all the other night owls on the podcast here. But I really feel like that's just when I naturally fall asleep. I'm not a napper. A little after midnight, every night, I'm tired. Boom, lights out, let's go. And then I can get, if I don't have an early morning meeting, I can get a solid 8 hours of sleep. But if I'm a night owl like that, and I'm really going along with like what feels natural to me, and I'm allowed to get a certain amount of sleep, I will get the 8 hours. What happens if I need to shift at some point to becoming more of a morning person? Can that happen, or am I kind of stuck with the night owl schedule?
Oh, no. So, first of all, you are in great company. There are tons of really smart and creative people that are night owls.
Yes.
So, I think one thing that we've learned through the pandemic is that you're not a failure if you're not at your desk at 8 o'clock in the morning,
Thank
right? We
goodness.
all have we all have our own circadian preference, and so I think it's important to honor that. Now, if we have these other obligations that go against that, yes, we can absolutely shift, but it needs to be intentional and it needs to be consistent. So you can't just shift for the work week and then just sort of fall back on the weekends,
Hmm.
right? Because we have to maintain that alignment with our circadian rhythm. And so, yeah, we do bright light in the morning. Sometimes we'll do some melatonin at night, timed 2 or 3 hours before bed to try to shift your circadian rhythm. There are apps out there that will help you go from one time zone to another, for example, right? And so, yeah, we can absolutely program it. Now, I'm a night owl, so
Yes.
I get it.
Hmm.
And to me, I feel like, why wouldn't I want to see patients when I am at my best?
I am with you on that. And that's such a great point, but you can't really do that because that's not how society dictates what our schedule should be.
Well, so I'm hoping that we have a little wiggle room now, right? I think we're so much more receptive to remote work. We're more receptive to, people kind of doing things offline. And I think that is, I'm hoping that's something that we see moving forward. There's a really interesting study that talked about, we've seen this decrease in restaurant workers. And one of the theories is that people who have this sort of nighttime preference would take food service jobs because that's what you could do at night. And
Hmm.
so now that we do remote work, all of a sudden these night owls can do stuff at night at home on their computer and not have to be in food service.
There you go. Interesting. I like that. That's a really fascinating study. So let
Isn't that
me
kind of
ask you
cool?
this, Dr. Khosla. Okay, if you let's just say you can't sleep in the nighttime and you get up, does Dr. Khosla ever get up in the night and snack away?
I don't. But here's the other part of it. When we do this nocturnal eating, sometimes it is a sign that we are restricting our calories too much during the day. And so the solution is to do sort of a high protein snack before you go to bed. But there is this other phenomenon where people will eat in their sleep. and not be aware of it.
Oh, I've heard of
And
this.
so,
My friends' kids have had this issue. Yes, this does
is
happen
that
often.
right?
Yes.
Yes, and so sometimes it's really weird thing too. Like people will eat a frozen pizza that is still frozen, right? Or they'll turn the oven on to 400 degrees and totally forget about it.
No.
Or yes, and they'll wake up and they've got candy wrappers in bed, and they're like, "Why do I have candy wrappers in my bed?" It's a side effect of some medications too. And so when we hear the story, the first question is, well, are you awake when you're doing this, or are you asleep? Are you in a fog? Is this more sleepwalking, or is this an eating disorder? So some people will develop this eating disorder where, you have to have something in your gut before you go to bed.
So do they
Right?
actually remember doing it? Is that the question you're asking them? Do you remember when this happened, or in the morning they just see that the oven is still on and they see the pizza
Yes.
box?
So that's one of the questions. Do you remember it? Because usually if you're awake, you'll probably remember something about it, right? Because you've been intentional. You're like, I'm going to go and I'm going to have, cereal or something like that. But other times they're just astonished. So in one day, and I'll never forget this, in one day I saw two patients back to back. One had gained like 80 pounds sleep eating.
Oh, goodness.
Yeah. And the other one had done maybe 30 or 40. And one of them had bariatric surgery. And so then you get into this whole psychology of, are you starving yourself so much during the day that your body is saying, hey, I need food?
And your brain is telling you this is
exactly.
not, yes, right.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. And so it's really important when we talk about health, right? Just because you go to a specialist, it doesn't mean that you hone in on only that one thing, right? So we can't have blinders on. So if we hear the story, then you have to kind of delve into, well, what else could this be?
Right.
Could it be a sign of this or that or what have you? And then reach out to, our colleagues and say, hey, this is what's happening with this person. Can you please take a look and tell me what you think?
Yes, and sort of like an overall life analysis at that point. You're really kind of assessing the whole thing. Yeah, sure. So let's talk now about snoring. All right,
Yeah.
So let's say there's a light sleeper sleeping with a snorer. What is a person to do? What do you recommend? I mean, waking up tired is absolutely no fun, but neither is sleeping alone. So, what advice do you have? Earplugs?
It's actually a sleep disorder. It's called extrinsic sleep disorder, meaning your sleep is fragmented because of something else, right? The train or the snoring or the dog or the whatever. And so it is important to make sure that you get adequate sleep. So maybe a separate sleep environment, separate room or something like that. People term it a sleep divorce, which I think is a terrible name. But the idea of everybody getting their own sleep, I think is, it's an important one. I've taken care of couples that have been married 60 years, and they swear that's a secret to a good marriage. But I think the question I would ask is, if that snoring is disrupting your sleep, it probably is also disrupting whoever is snoring their sleep. And that may be a sign of an underlying sleep disorder like obstructive sleep apnea, and they probably should go have it checked out.
Yes, something medical could be going on as opposed to just having the other person use earplugs, white noise, the guest bedroom, whatever it may be.
Yeah. And to be perfectly fair, I think most of the people that we see in sleep clinic are not there because they necessarily want to be.
Yes, that's fair.
Says, that they're snoring and so on and so forth. And it's so funny because invariably at Christmas, somebody's spouse will tell me that the CPAP was the best present that they ever got.
The CPAP?
Because now there's, the machine that you use to treat sleep apnea. And so their spouse is on this new machine, and now as a result, they are sleeping better.
Now, we talk about kids and sleep all the time, but I think the topic of kids and sleep is really also a topic of parents and sleep, because I'm a firm believer in if you got to train those little ones early to sleep. But also then when they turn into teenagers, as you are in the thick of that as well, it keeps us as parents awake in a different way. So we've got the kid thing, the small, the babies, the younger toddlers, then the teenage years. So parents are awake there's worry, there's anxiety. What's the strategy then as a parent with, let's say, teenagers? How can we sort of get a handle on our sleep at that point if the teenagers are out late or they're driving home and parents are trying to sleep and they're waiting up for the kids? What's your advice on that?
I think there's a lot of compromise here. Technology allows us to at least keep in touch with each other in certainly in a more significant way than I ever had when I was a teenager. And so this idea of having to wait up for your children, maybe we have to have a little wiggle room. Maybe we have a curfew of 11 instead of midnight, right? Maybe there's communication via technology to say, I'm coming home, I'm going to be late, something like that, because it's not tenable
right.
to stay up late.
Amen.
So here's the other part of it that I've noticed. So my oldest is quite a bit older than my youngest. And when she was growing up, this was sort of early cell phone days, the kids now aren't out as much, I don't think, as they were before. And of course, this is all obviously impacted by the pandemic. Mm-hmm. But because of social media and because of this technology, they're able to hang out with their friends, but still be at home.
So that is a very nice option, especially for parents, to not have to really disrupt their sleep, worrying about the drive home or what have you. So
right. And sporting events, I think that's where the problem is when it's on a school night, that they're out late for sporting events. And yeah, of course you want your kid to be home safe before you really nod off, right? Mm-hmm. And so hopefully, and this is part of what we've seen with the school start times too, is that we do need to be mindful of how far are we traveling for sports, and when are the kids going to be back, and they need to go to bed, and I think there's more appreciation from the teachers too, and the school administrators that yeah, you know what, their sleep is important, and maybe we don't need to travel 4 hours to go do something. Maybe we'll compete 2 hours away instead.
And when they're doing those sports schedules in the athletic department, they're not thinking about kids' sleep schedules. So this is something that really needs to become a little bit more, part of the conversation, perhaps.
Well, and I think it depends on where you are, because we've definitely seen a shift where, so I live in Minnesota, and it's obviously a big hockey area. And so the ice time is reserved for the younger kids earlier in the day.
Oh,
and
that's
the adults
excellent.
Get ice time. It is. And so the adults get ice time later.
Mm-hmm,
and so they've
great.
Made these concessions because I think they recognize that, kids need to get to sleep.
Well, and also rural versus sort of urban areas too. Rural areas,
right.
You have to travel further to get to the school where you're playing, whether it's the hockey or the football game or, whatever it may be and what season you're in. So let's dive in a little bit to what the top reason is that people don't sleep. Is it stress? I mean, is it pain? Is it tech devices? Social media is never shutting down. What are the top reasons people don't sleep?
So I think it'll be a little bit skewed, because the people that I see are the ones that are bothered that they can't sleep. And so they seem to have a little underlying anxiety or something about that, versus when you look at population studies and you look at how much sleep people are getting, if they're up all night on their, playing video games and stuff, they may not see it as a problem. Mm-hmm. Because, again, going back to, they're not recognizing that they're chronically sleep deprived. And so they're up until, 4 a.m. playing whatever,
right.
On, Call of Duty or whatever, and then not getting adequate sleep during the day, and then maybe catching up over the weekend. There was a poll that showed it's incredible how many adults play video games.
I guess that's all good and fine until you have to get up for that early morning coffee meeting, and then it's a bit of a struggle. The struggle is real at that point.
Well, and it's so funny too, right? Because our go-to is, I just need like a lot of coffee this morning, and it's become socially very acceptable to say that, right? And so I think we have to be a little bit careful. We have all of these energy drinks now, and all of, and they have just a ton of caffeine in them, plus guarana and plus all this other stuff. And there was a case report of a 17-year-old that had an energy drink and then one of those McDonald's caffeine, coffee drinks, and he died from the caffeine.
An overload of caffeine. Oh my goodness, it's awful.
Yeah, and could he have had something with his heart before? I don't know.
Right,
but
exactly.
I just think it's so available. It's so easy.
It's true. And you don't realize the harm of it. What you just said, that college student never had any idea, I'm sure, that he was overloading so much so that he was taxing his body like that and actually killed him. So,
Well, and it's
to that
easy.
point, right? Yes. I mean, to that point, are sleeping prescriptions, things of that nature, are those a good solution, or should we stay away from that type of thing?
There is this huge market of over-the-counter sleep aids, these sort of nutraceuticals or these nutritional supplements and so on and so forth. None of the sleep aids that we have, prescription included, are, I mean, they're okay. They're okay. When they analyze them, yeah, they might help you fall asleep a little bit faster, maybe help you stay in bed a little bit longer. They have weird side effects. For the right person, though, I think they're fine. It's just they're not meant for everybody. And so if the issue is that you are chugging caffeine, with your evening meal and you're not being thoughtful about a wind down routine, then you know what? A prescription sleep aid probably isn't the right way to go.
It's more
Right? We
time
need
to
to
assess our lifestyle choices and our
kind
habits.
of.
Yeah,
Well,
right.
so this is what I love about sleep, though, is that, everybody needs to sleep. I used to call it the great equalizer. It doesn't matter who you are. If you're, with means or without, if you're educated or not, everybody needs to sleep.
Yes, that's true. So true. Yes, for sure. And I often kind of wonder how we got to the place where now we need to be told how to sleep, or we need to have a tracker and a wearable, whether it's, a wrist or a ring or something that goes under the mattress to inform us on how little or how much we sleep, which really, frankly, just stresses us out more because now we know what we didn't want to know, which is, we're not sleeping well. So how do you feel about all of that?
I think the sleep track is really kind of fascinating, some of this data that we can get from the sleep trackers and so on and so forth. What I usually ask, though, is I will ask somebody, what prompted you to purchase this? Did you get it for Christmas? Were you doing it for steps? Or was it something about your sleep that you wanted to monitor? And so there's something you can monitor it, but they're not actually, they're not actionable. So it might tell you that you got this sleep score of 78, right? And the challenge is that they are proprietary, right? It's a super competitive industry. And so when you try to tease apart, well, what does the sleep score of 78 mean? I have no idea.
Well, and all it really does is sort of, it provokes anxiety, because then you're like, oh my gosh, I don't think I got enough sleep. Oh, I wasn't in the right stage of sleep. And now what?
So what I think is helpful, though, is what I ask people, because they've obviously invested in this device, right? And so, we always say, well, take it with a grain of salt, and let's maybe look at the trend. So let's say we do an intervention, right? Let's say we say, okay, let's start doing meditation before you go to bed, right? Let's start a prescription sleep aid. Let's start a therapeutic for sleep apnea. And then let's see what happens to your sleep afterwards. Let's see if it shows us anything. It's funny because now we are seeing some people come in just because their tracker says there's something wrong with their sleep. And a lot of the time there is something wrong with their
Right.
sleep.
Okay.
Yes. And so I usually just say, well, okay, you tell me how you feel in the morning, not how your Fitbit tells you slept. You wake up and you write down how you think you slept, and then let's see if it matches.
That's a great approach to those trackable devices or wearables and trackables. So listen, Dr. Khosla, we have come to the end of this Business Life After Hours podcast, and frankly, I'm anything but sleepy right now because I feel like super energized after talking to you. So if you could give us a takeaway, like a takeaway sleep nugget to leave our listeners with as it ties to our topic of sort of sleeping better and really loving sleep and enjoying sort of this habit of that we can get into, what would that nugget or two be?
I would ask people to please, please, please prioritize your sleep. Sleep is the third pillar of health. We have diet, we have exercise, and we have sleep. And if you are getting enough hours of sleep, but you still don't feel rested, please see somebody. Sleep disorders are very, very common and hugely undiagnosed.
That is an excellent nugget, and I feel like I have a takeaway nugget too. And I feel like part of that and what you're teaching me is that we all don't have to live a sleep-deprived life. And before bed, we can choose to, whether it's planning for tomorrow or allowing ourselves to at least just let go of some of the stress by just shutting things down and just chilling out, helping our bodies relax. That is going to take us just miles. And that way we can get up and do it all over again the next day.
One of my colleagues said that we shouldn't think of sleep as the end of our day, but it is the beginning of our next day.
Oh, that's brilliant. I love that. I love that because it does.
Jeff Dermer. Yep.
We'll give credit where credit is due on that remark.
Yes.
That's awesome. Yes. Well, and if Business Life After Hours listeners would like to learn more about your work or the American Academy of Sleep Medicine's work, where can they find it?
The AASM website is aasm.org.
Terrific. Thank you so much, Dr. Seema Khosla. I feel more relaxed already, having been enlightened about sleeping better and knowing some excellent strategies to be a solid, world-class sleeper. Great to have you on Business Life After Hours.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Find success by your own definition at your intersection of business and life on my next podcast. Thanks for joining us. I'm Kristi Kay.
Business Life After Hours is hosted and produced by Kristi Kay. Audio engineering, production, and editing by Chris Pfeiffer. Be sure to join Kristi for her award-winning television series, Business Life 360, the third Thursday of the month on WGTE HD or at wgte.org/B360. Business Life After Hours is a production of WGTE Public Media.